The writing of a dissertation. How I Got My Ph.D. One day in the spring of 1987, as Steve Werner was riding his bike, a brilliant light flashed from the skies. Steve was thrown from his bike. A voice thundered from the heavens.
Stephen! Stephen! Get up! Go into the city and write a doctoral dissertation.
Steve set out immediately to find a topic for his dissertation. He consulted many sources. But then, one day, walking along West Pine... But what was a Huslein? Steve learned that Huslein was not a thing, but rather a person. Joseph Caspar Huslein, S.J., was a leading figure in American Catholic social ethics in the early 1900s. And so, Huslein was to be the dissertation topic. Throughout the long days of research in 1987 and 1988, Steve continued. Each day, Steve rubbed the nose of Pius XII for good luck. Steve learned to use the card catalog. He learned to use computers and microfiche. Throughout the project, Steve was watched by his guardian angels. With the research complete, Steve began writing. Steve surveyed the forest that was to be cut down to supply enough pulp for the drafts of his dissertation. At times, the work became difficult. Frustration overwhelmed Steve. There were problems with the library staff. In anger, Steve tried to vandalize the statue of Pius XII. He wanted to cut off the index finger and leave the middle finger standing. Free on bail, but still angry, Steve punched out Pius XII. Steve learned to type with one hand. Steve showed the first draft to his dissertation director.
Lord have mercy.
Weeks later, his director read the second draft.
Ay, caramba.
Months later, his director read the third draft of Steve's dissertation. Then, late one evening in 1989, Steve gave up. About midnight, the spirit of Joseph Huslein appeared. Huslein warned Steve that 3 spirits would visit him that night. The first spirit arrived at 1, the ghost of dissertations complete. Then the second spirit arrived at 2, the ghost of dissertations still in progress. And at 3, the ghost of dissertations never completed. This spirit took Steve to a cemetery. The next day, a renewed Steve set about making the necessary revisions. He dismantled the bomb he had put in the theology department. Finally, Steve's dissertation was accepted and he graduated. Stephen Werner, Ph.D. Stephen Werner with his Ph.D. Here's Steve waiting for the big Huslein Day parade to begin. Perhaps we can summarize this story. Steve is condemned to write a dissertation. Steve takes up his cross. Steve falls the first time. Steve hits the mother lode. Coffee and polystyrene helps Steve carry his cross. Veronica wipes Steve's academic files from the computer. Steve meets the women in the theology department. Steve falls a second time. Steve is stripped of his sanity. Steve is nailed by his dissertation director. Steve's dissertation dies. Steve's dissertation passes. Steve's dissertation is laid to rest. Steve is laid to rest.